Is Zed hard to balance? He's hard to balance in the sense that he's the most frustrating champion in League of Legends. And so we always have to balance him considering the fact that he is the most frustrating champion in League of Legends. And so Zed generally has to be slightly weaker than he would be normally to account for the fact that he is the most frustrating champion in League of Legends. Rumble is pro, Rumble is everywhere until nerfs just about now. Rumble is quite literally 100% pick ban in pro, which is why we're nerfing him. It's like one of the big reasons we're nerfing him. Why is it an anti-heal item for every class, but anti-shield is only for assassins? Because if anti-shield was more present, we would have to buff all the shields in the game. That's the reason. So the more present a counter system is, the more powerful the system it counters has to be if we truly want it to be viable. So somewhat counterintuitively, the reason shield, you don't have to buy anti-shield every game, is because we don't have anti-shield. Whereas if we put more anti-shield into the game, we made it powerful and more available, we would have to buff all the shields in compensation, which would then force you to buy anti-shield more often. And the reason we would have to buff all the shields in compensation is certain shields in League of Legends are there to like promote gameplay patterns that are very important. As an example, SETT's W. SETT's W gives him a giant shield. It needs to make SETT's pattern make sense in League of Legends. If SETT was very likely to run into, say, a 40% reduction to that shield every game, we'd probably have to increase his shield strength by 40%, which then the end result of that is not that anti-shielding counters SETT. The end result of that is if you don't buy anti-shielding, you instantly lose to SETT, and if you do buy anti-shielding, you go even. And so by making it only a more niche output of a specific class, it allows us to balance shields for everybody else, given that we need shields to fulfill their purpose on things like SETT W and EKKO W. You saw this when we did when we buffed Grievous Wounds for the new item system 5 years ago. When we added Mythics items to the game, we buffed Grievous Wounds to 60% reduction, and we made it on everything, and you could just get it trivially. And the end result of this is we had to buff Mundo, we had to buff VLAD, we had to give Soraka Grievous Wounds removal on her ultimate. Because when Grievous Wounds was so present, those characters' identities and healers stopped functioning. And so the end result was that if you bought Grievous Wounds against Soraka, VLAD, Mundo, you weren't actually countering them, you were going even. And if you didn't buy Grievous Wounds, you just lost the game. So it's kind of this thing where it's, if you have a counter system, the system that it counters needs to account for it more the more present it is. And so now Grievous Wounds is weaker, we moved it back to 40%, and we've said Grievous Wounds for most classes comes at a cost. You don't just get to pick it up for free. And so the end result there is that we can make Soraka and VLAD and Mundo weaker on average while still having a counter for them in the system. Whereas if Grievous Wounds is stronger, we'd have to make Soraka and VLAD and Mundo even stronger to account for it, which would just mean that if you didn't buy Grievous Wounds, you instantly lose the game. So we generally think it's a better system as a whole when things like Grievous Wounds or Shield Cut are less prevalent and more trade-offy to buy. So that's kind of the idea there. I really hate that AD carries do more damage than assassins as ranged characters. So I want to unpack that a little bit. Roke Tatara. So an idea that AD carries do more damage than assassins as ranged characters. First of all, it could very well be true that some AD carries right now are doing more bursts than assassins. 100%. Very well be true. But one thing I want to address about this statement is one thing that is very important when examining assassin damage for AD carry damage is the time it takes to come out. Okay? And what I mean by that is, it turns out that in a team fight, an AD carry can very easily assassinate 5 people because they have sustained damage, they do a lot of damage, and so a character like Draven is very, very good at doing what we would call sustained burst. And you might be looking at that and be like, isn't that fucked up? Isn't that fair? Draven just gets to sustained burst the entire enemy team, where Zed can only do it once. But there's a very, very important difference between Draven and Zed. And that is, Draven has an attack timer. And so, despite the fact that Draven is sustained bursting you, he still has to wait the time between his auto attacks to get to that damage threshold. Zed, on the other hand, once he ults you, he will Q and E and auto, and that'll all come out in about half a second. And so one of the really important things to analyze when thinking about burst is the fact that AD carries, even though they can burst you a lot with auto attacks, the fact that they have an attack timer means their burst in an instant, for most times, again, there might be AD carries who like right now are bursting better than assassins. I'm not saying that's not true, but it means that the average AD carry's burst is gated by the attack timer. And in League of Legends, even a quarter second matters a ton. It matters a lot. And so Rengar, one of the reasons Rengar is an assassin is because he unloads all his damage in basically a frame. He QWER, all of that happens at the same time. Whereas imagine an AD carry that was doing something like Rengar, they still have to attack once or twice. So they have to attack 2 or 3 times. And the distance between that second and third attack is very meaningful in a character's ability to burst someone. Because you have to consider that when someone is getting bursted, what are they going to do? Their support might shield them. They might try to exhaust you. They might try to dash away. They might go invulnerable, right? Characters in League of Legends have all these things that lower burst or like let them mitigate like them getting killed. And so one of the more important parts about a character bursting you is that they can do it almost as instantly as possible. And so yeah, mainly just mentioning, I'm not saying like the game is perfectly balanced. Yes, like maybe there's a certain AD carry who bursts you better than an assassin, and like that might be a problem. But mainly mentioning that Zed's kit inherently, assuming everything else is balanced, is much better at bursting you than, say, excuse me, than, say, Zeri's kit, because Zeri has to, like, take that small amount of extra time to auto 2 or 3 times, and that's a big deal in League of Legends. Thoughts about shifting KAYLE'S power back into auto attacking? I hear this a lot, and like, I'm not saying you're wrong, but like, KAYLE'S still buying Nashor's Tooth every game. That said, she's not buying Berserker's Greaves as much anymore, so it's like, she's still auto attacking a lot, but maybe we're supposed to shift some power out of burst into like her AP ratio on the passive or something. I can see that. But like, I guess I would say is like, KAYLE is designed to build Deathcap. She is designed to build Riot. She is designed to build Lichbane. Those are all supposed to be a part of her build. She is not supposed to build Nashor's, Ginsu's every single game. Although ideally Ginsu's would be more viable on her than it is. I think one of the problems with KAYLE's auto-attacking build is that we took Omnivamp out of the system. And so KAYLE as an attacker has no way to keep herself alive over like a sustained fight. Which, you know, twins towards things like bursting. And so, yeah, I do wonder, maybe she's off a bit. If she was off, I'd probably do things like, you know, tune down some AP ratios on burst and like buff the AP ratio on her auto attacking or something like that. That could maybe help. Why was Tristana nuked? Tristana was nuked because she was taking over mid lane and we wanted to adjust her to not be as mid dominant. I don't think we intended to nerf her as hard as we did. Mana changes are always pretty nebulous in terms of like what they're gonna do. And so for every person who saw that change list and was like, clearly this is a giant nerf, there was other people who saw that change list and were like, this will do nothing. What is Riot thinking? Like straight up, we had like a couple pro players be like, or like high level analysts be like, this change list does nothing. What are you doing? And clearly it did a lot in terms of power. So yeah, mainly the goal of that change list was to move her a bit out of mid because she's kind of been taken over mid and that's pretty problematic. But I don't think the intent was to go as far as it ended up doing. But that's the thing with game balance is you never are going to be completely sure the exact changes, what they're going to do. And sometimes a change that looks like it does nothing does a lot, and sometimes a change that looks like it does a lot does nothing. So it's a imprecise science.